What's missing in our dating education? Everything. Everything's missing. You get nothing. You don't get a dating education. Who gets a dating education? Are you guys getting educated in how to date? It's huge trial and mostly errors. It's a disaster. My name is Miriam Lipskier. My husband and I and our 8 beautiful children run the Chabad Student Center at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. I don't think there's anything more important in making our world a better place than happy, functional relationships between people. I think of all the things we could do and accomplish in the world, save the whales, save the rainforest, save the trees, they're all important and valuable, and there's nothing that takes priority above healthy, happy, functional relationships, no matter who it's between. And I'm very passionate about at least trying to assist people in whether it's making better choices, trying, new angles, doing things in a different way, but all for the purpose of enhancing their relationship with themselves, with their creator, and probably most importantly with one another, because these things are all linked and all vital and important for our world. What's one thing in our culture that makes dating difficult? So Socrates, the great philosopher, once told one of his disciples, he said, if you're lucky, you'll find a good wife. And if not, you'll become a philosopher. And I think it's safe to say today we have a lot of philosophers, we have a lot of noise and a lot of talk about relationships. And if the question posed here is what makes dating in our culture so difficult, there are many factors, but the one that stands out to me is our mode of communication. How we communicate is very different than all the generations that came before us. Research done by Harvard about communication was something along these lines, that when we communicate, 55% of what we're expressing comes across in our body language, 38% is our tone of voice, and 7% is the words that we're using. So now take those figures and take those stats and put your communication on a screen, which means we just eliminated all of my body language. There's no body here. It's just letters on a screen. And obviously my tone, you cannot pick up if I say what. Am I saying what? What? You just see 5 letters, if you put a question mark. And I think we have a really big challenge because we communicate so much without the elements of humanity in our communication, where I could look into your eyes and I could sense your presence and I could feel your vibe and I could kind of connect with your soul, because there's 2 human beings here. And the majority of our communication is done through a screen. And so my advice would be to help remedy this challenge. Anytime you have an opportunity to connect with someone in person, to have a conversation in person, to meet up, even though that means putting your shoes on and leaving the front door, not doing it on a Zoom, you're still missing body language there, and even tone, it's one-dimensional. But anytime you have an opportunity to have a conversation, whether it's a big conversation or really just, shooting the breeze, do it in person, do it face-to-face, do it eye-to-eye, heart-to-heart, and we'll learn more about one another that way. We'll learn more about ourselves that way. And we'll become a little bit better at communicating when we actually do communicate as 2 human beings and take away the things that separate us and divide us, or the things we hide behind. Also, I will say sometimes a lot easier to say things in a concise sentence. And everybody knows that annoyance of watching those 3 dots floating around on your screen, waiting for the next words to come in. But when you see those dots, know whatever words are going to pop up on your screen, you are missing most of the story. You're missing most of what that person's feeling and most of what that person is trying to communicate. You're getting about 7% if the research is correct. What is one of the biggest misconceptions about marriage? Very often we think marriage is all about who you marry. And while that obviously is really important, if we had to break it down to numbers and put some data behind it, it probably would fall something like this. 20% of your future happiness and your marriage is going to be dependent on who you marry, but most likely 80%, the far greater percentage here, is going to be dependent on how you treat each other every day. And so while this isn't to say that who you marry isn't important and significant. It actually matters much more how you go about treating that person that you're committing to spend a life with. And the larger emphasis is going to be on how am I treating this person, not who is this person. Who is marriage really for? So the best way to simplify this answer and condense it is that there are 3 fundamental relationship models. The first one is probably the most basic and the most common that we see around us, and that is where both parties have their needs being met. You're giving me what I need and vice versa, and that relationship works pretty well unless something or someone comes along that's offering me better options, and then I may switch providers, but otherwise it's working out. That's one model. I'm getting my needs met, I'm taking and receiving, and it's working. A second mode or model, which is a more traditional Jewish model, is based on or founded in the word for love, which is ahava, which is actually in this word ahava, which means love, not that Dead Sea product that you buy at the checkout, at the wherever, but ahava is from the word have, which means to give. And so from a Jewish perspective, a higher level of a relationship model to maybe strive for or perhaps look to achieve is I'm not just here to see what I could get, and I'm not just here to see, what can you give me, but rather it's a verb. I want to give. I feel like I have space in my heart. I want to share my life with someone. I want to nurture. I want to take care. I want to love. And it's an act where I am giving to you. And that's a different model because instead of taking and receiving, I am giving. That is a more traditional Jewish model based on the word ahava, love. The third model is a Kabbalistic model, and that is that I'm not here to take and I'm not even here to give, but rather together we're going to contribute something of value to the world around us. And this model, which is presented by the Hasidic masters as the paradigm that God intended when he created this concept of marriage, is imagine 2 people who could commit to one another, not just for what each one brings to the other in the dynamic of their relationship, but rather what these 2 together can bring into our world and what these 2 can leave and can, a legacy that they could create and put out into the world. If I had to sum it up, I'm here to get, it could work. I'm here to give, it could work. But then there's something even higher and even better than both of them. It's not about either of us, it's both of us together creating something larger than who we would be as individuals. And so in this construct, Kabbalah teaches us that marriage is really God's way of having people working hand in hand, improving our world and contributing to make our world a more beautiful, loving place. Are spouses responsible to fix each other's negative behavior? The answer is no. Marriage is not a construction project. You're not here to fix somebody else. However, what will inevitably happen is your spouse will hold up a mirror to the things in yourself that probably need some fixing and polishing. And so an analogy that I heard that really visualizes this or helps us see this in a tangible way is if you think of 2 diamonds in the rough. They're not very valuable when they're in that form, but when they are polished and smoothed down, they are infinitely more, or maybe quantitatively more valuable and qualitatively more valuable because they've been polished and their brilliance can come out. And if you think of 2 human beings bringing out from one another through their daily interactions, through their commitment to building a future and a home and a life together, we inevitably are going to brush up against one another's challenges, difficulties, the things that aren't so glamorous and charming and beautiful about one another. And that's not a default in the relationship. That's actually the setting. That's actually the intended purpose in God's incredible design of 2 human beings committing to share a life together, is that in this process, we're going to polish and shine one another. Is the only purpose of marriage to have children? The simple answer is no. It is a value to have children, but it's not the only value of marriage, and it's certainly not the only one that the Torah says forth as the intended purpose of the marital relationship. In fact, the first time that marriage is mentioned in the Torah, God says it is not good for a human to be alone. It's not talking about family and reproduction and offspring and children. It's referring to a couple, a husband and a wife, that a good state for a human being to be in is in relationship with another. Not commenting on having children, it's a separate commandment, and the foundational opening statement of why marriage is something that God invented, pretty interesting idea, is not solely for a marriage that then brings children into the world, although it's not to that exclusion either. But we do ourselves a disservice when we think the only purpose for a marriage or the only reason why this institution exists on a traditional religious level is so that you could have children. And I don't believe that that's accurate, because the camaraderie, the friendship, the love, and the connection that two people can have and bring into the world with or without children is of vital importance in God's view. And there's mitzvahs about populating the world and being fruitful and multiplying that are separate and distinct from this value of sharing a life with another. And the things that occur in a relationship when it's just two people still have merit and value, infinite merit and value, in terms of the impact it has on our world. And it has no bearing on if there are children in this picture. And so I'll segue that into the next question that usually comes, which is that pleasure and connection and intimacy in Judaism is not also solely for the purpose of reproduction and children. And there's a separate mitzvah of ona, which is simply focused on the godly delight and pleasure that God created in the world, which is actually a bridge to a greater connection to God, with or without that outcome of children, which again is not to say that it isn't an important value. It's just not necessarily the only factor with a marriage and intimacy, that the reason why God created it is for that outcome of children. And there's vital importance and contribution to a couple just as they are, and to a couple creating a dynamic that's healthy and loving and warm and passionate with or without children in the picture. What's the most common challenge people bring in their relationship? So I'll say prior to the relationship, the most challenging thing that people bring along are their expectations, which are usually just a setup for disappointment and failure. And then in the marriage, if you're already in the relationship and you're not anticipating this fantasy, you're in the reality, the biggest obstacle is usually all the baggage and all the other things that are in the room with you. The airport in Atlanta, largest or most traveled airport in the world, has a ginormous escalator that everybody has to get on because the same plane train takes you to the baggage claim. And I'm heading up this it probably takes 2 or 3 minutes because it's a very steep escalator with a couple of my kids. And as we're slowly going up the escalator, there's probably 5 or 6 different escalators that are all moving at the same time. And there's a fellow right next to us in the escalator going near us with this ginormous backpack. It was literally over his head down to his knees. Like it looked like his whole entire life was in this backpack. And he was grunting under the weight of this ginormous backpack. And one of my kids just observed this guy like holding this backpack and shifting very uncomfortably under its weight. And my kid says to me, doesn't this guy know that like at least for the next 2 or 3 minutes, he could just let the backpack sit on the step of the escalator like near him and it will be carried for him. And then when he gets to the top, he'll obviously have to pick it up, but at least he'll get a few minute break. And he doesn't have to hold it while he's being held by the escalator. I said, that's such a good idea. Why don't you tell him? My kid didn't want to tell him, but in the car on the way home, we had this conversation that we all actually do that. We carry things that aren't actually serving us. And we could put it down because the same energy and force that's carrying us can carry all our baggage. And we can put it down and yeah, we'll pick it up when we need it. We'll revisit it. We'll, get back to getting under that weight of that burden and that struggle. But there are moments in life, and relationship is a lifetime moment, or I would say there's moments in life, and relationship is built up of moments and moments that make up our life, where all the baggage we're bringing into it is actually coloring and affecting what's going on in the room. And if I could leave some of it, not on the escalator, but maybe in the lobby, or maybe put it in a closet for a rainy day and just show up a little more free and a little more raw and a little bit more vulnerable, but with a little bit less stuff, everybody's going to be better off for it. What's one thing you learned about relationships since getting married? I would say I never realized how powerful what you choose to focus on is in a dynamic of a relationship, and where you choose to shine the light and what you choose to see and what you choose to point out and what you choose to notice is really what's going to grow and what's going to be at your front and center. And that's really all that matters, is what's at the front and center for you. So what I learned after getting married was you have so much power in your hands, because what you choose to focus on is what you're going to see and get more of. And what you value and appreciate and point out and notice is what you're going to see a lot more of. So make sure it's the right stuff. What's missing in our dating education? Everything. Everything's missing. You get nothing. You don't get a dating education. Who gets a dating education? Are you guys getting educated in how to date? It's huge trial and mostly errors. It's a disaster. The top 5 most important things in relationships. The top 5 most important things in a relationship don't matter. Because what matters is, what are the things that are valuable to you? Someone else's top 5 list of what they think is important in their relationship may be great for them. This is about you. So you got to get out there and live your life and find out what is valuable in your relationships. Someone else's top 5 list, it's kind of like someone's top 5 playlist. Is it yours? If it's not, it doesn't matter. They're not triggering and inspiring what you need and what you're looking for. Stop looking for someone else's playlist of life and create your own. By the way, if anyone tells you the answer, like gives you here are the top 5, please run. Like very, 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 put on your sneaks and run. I'll tell you why, because the top 5 most important things to them may not be the top 5 to you.